Hello everyone and welcome back to UK Homicide. Today's case remained unsolved for 40 years. We're talking about the story of Carol Morgan, who was murdered in 1981 in the back room of her shop in a seemingly motiveless crime. The complexities of Carol's life, marriage, and ultimate death would unveil a story of betrayal and deception. It would be 2024 before justice was served, and the truth was revealed in a dramatic courtroom confrontation that exposed long-buried secrets. Carol was a familiar figure in Linslade. She and her husband Alan had purchased the local corner shop in 1979, and she quickly became the heart and soul of the small business, known for her kindness and dedication. Carol managed the shop with care, balancing long hours at work with her responsibilities as a mother. Alan, however, was restless. He felt weighed down by financial difficulties and the responsibilities of family life. Unknown to Carol, he had been having an affair with a local woman called Margaret Spooner. For Alan, leaving Carol meant freedom from mounting debt and the emotional drain of an unhappy marriage, and the allure of a new life with Margaret was all-consuming. Since purchasing the store in 1979, the Morgans had faced financial difficulties. The shop was underperforming, and their financial situation became increasingly strained with 2 children to support. Alan, who managed the store's finances, had been quietly borrowing money to keep up appearances. Debts mounted, and he became more desperate to escape what he saw as a dead-end life. In his mind, Carol stood as both the symbolic and literal obstacle to any chance of a fresh start. Meanwhile, Alan's relationship with Margaret Spooner became a source of hope and motivation. Margaret offered Alan the attention and support he felt he lacked at home. She encouraged him to imagine a future without Carol. But divorce was not a simple option for Alan. He feared the financial consequences of a split, believing it would expose his debts, ruin his reputation, and cost him what little financial stability he had. Alan's calculation came to a chilling conclusion. Removing Carol would not only eliminate the financial and emotional burden he associated with his marriage. Still, it would also free him to start over with Margaret. However, with no easy way to finance his new life, Alan began thinking of ways to resolve his situation by taking control of their shared assets more sinisterly. In the months leading up to Carol's murder, Alan began to make arrangements that would support his plan to have her killed. Knowing that a direct assault on Carol would immediately place him under suspicion, he devised a calculated strategy to create an unbreakable alibi. He began hinting to his young employee, Jane Bunting, that he was looking to be free of his wife, even asking her if she knew anyone who could help him get rid of her. His desperation grew, and he made large cash withdrawals, intending to either pay someone to commit the murder or establish a fund that would keep him and Margaret financially afloat once Carol was gone. On August 13, 1981, Alan took his 2 children to a nearby cinema, seemingly a wholesome family outing, which provided him with an ironclad alibi. While he was away, Carol was attacked in the storeroom of their shop, suffering fatal injuries from a heavy weapon, likely a machete or axe. Alan returned to discover Carol's lifeless body, reporting the murder to authorities in what appeared to be a moment of shock and sorrow. To investigators, Alan's alibi appeared foolproof, and his performance of grief was convincing. The initial police inquiry failed to connect him to the crime, largely due to the lack of physical evidence and the credible alibi he had established. As a result, Alan felt confident that he would escape suspicion. With Carol out of the way, he could access the store's assets and the life insurance payout, which he saw as a means to clear his debts and start anew with Margaret. Detective Chief Superintendent Brian Prickett led the original investigation, which became one of the most significant inquiries in Bedfordshire's history. Prickett and his team dedicated months to the case, seeking justice for Carol and answers for her devastated family. Investigators interviewed hundreds of witnesses, revisiting every possible lead. With over 600 witness statements gathered and over 1,200 people interviewed, the police examined everyone who had known Carol, hoping to identify any suspicious connections. In the early stages, police looked at several potential suspects, including local residents with criminal records, transient workers, and even a few disgruntled customers. Yet, none of these leads panned out. There was no apparent motive for the killing, and the lack of a murder weapon only added to the challenge. Allen himself was questioned, but his alibi, taking his children to a movie in Luton at the time of the murder, held firm. As the investigation wore on, Carol's family grew more desperate. Still, without forensic evidence tying anyone to the crime, detectives faced a grim reality. The case eventually went cold in 1983, leaving Carol's family in a painful limbo. Carol Morgan's funeral was held in the small, close-knit community of Linslade shortly after her tragic death. The service occurred on a somber, overcast day, as if the skies mirrored the sorrow descending upon the town. Family, friends, and neighbors filled the modest stone church, many struggling to comprehend the brutality that had cut short Carol's life. For a community unaccustomed to violence, her murder was not only a loss, but an assault on the very peace and safety they held dear. The service was filled with heavy, quiet grief. Carol's children sat in the front pew, visibly distressed and confused. At the same time, friends gathered close, hoping their presence could somehow ease the children's sorrow. Allen Morgan, Carol's husband, stood with the mourners, displaying what many saw as a mask of grief. At the time, few suspected that he was involved in Carol's death, and he received condolences with the appearance of a husband devastated by the loss. Throughout the service, speakers remembered Carol's kindness, generosity, and unwavering commitment to her family and community. Friends shared stories of her warm smile, hard work at the family shop, and dedication as a mother. She was remembered as someone who greeted everyone with kindness and whose presence brightened her little corner of the world. Many spoke of her as the heart of Linslade, a woman who made others feel welcome and valued, whether they were neighbors, customers, or friends. The procession made its way to the gravesite, where Carol was laid to rest under a weeping willow, a place chosen for its quiet beauty and proximity to the town she loved. Friends and neighbors placed flowers on her casket, a sea of white lilies and pink carnations, symbolizing the purity of her spirit and the sorrow of her passing. There were few dry eyes as Carol was lowered into the earth, a farewell to a life that had been taken too soon. As the mourners departed, many struggled to find a sense of peace, haunted by questions that had no answers. In the years that followed, the shadow of Carol's unsolved murder lingered over Linslade, casting doubt and fear. It would be decades before the truth behind her tragic death emerged. Still, in the hearts of those who knew her, Carol remained a symbol of kindness and light, a life extinguished by a dark betrayal that her community would not forget. In 2018, Detective Superintendent Carl Foster and his team revisited the case. Advances in forensic science offered the possibility of uncovering evidence that had eluded investigators nearly 40 years earlier. Foster led a meticulous review of the case files and re-interviewed witnesses, even reaching out to people who had left Linslade long ago. The break in the case came when Jane Bunting, a former store employee who had been just 17 at the time of Carol's death, came forward with disturbing new information. She recalled a conversation with Allen, where he had asked if she knew anyone who could get rid of Carol. Jane had kept this information to herself for years out of fear, but her conscience ultimately led her to reveal what she knew. The police now had a witness who directly implicated Allen, shifting the investigation's focus from searching for unknown assailants to re-examining Carol's husband. Detectives uncovered more evidence in Allen's financial records, large cash withdrawals made in the months before Carol's death, suggesting he may have been attempting to hire someone for the crime. Other witnesses spoke to the growing hostility in Allen and Carol's relationship, painting a picture of a man profoundly resentful and desperate to escape his marital obligations. This accumulation of evidence pointed convincingly to Allen, leading to his arrest in 2021 and setting the stage for a dramatic courtroom showdown. The long-awaited trial began in June 2024 at Luton Crown Court, London. Carol's now adult children attended each day, visibly distressed as prosecutors and defense attorneys argued over the painful details of their mother's murder. Allen, by now a frail 74-year-old, faced charges of conspiracy to murder, with his former lover, Margaret, also on trial, but pleading her innocence. The trial gripped the community, many of whom had followed the unsolved case for decades. The prosecution, led by barrister Michael Davies, presented a chilling narrative of Alan's premeditated plan. Davies argued that Alan had meticulously orchestrated Carol's murder to eliminate her from his life and evade financial obligations that had become a burden. Davies detailed the evidence of Alan's cash withdrawals, which were unusual for the family's modest lifestyle. Coupled with Jane Bunting's testimony, this evidence painted Alan as a man willing to pay for his wife's death. Witness after witness recounted the tension in the Morgan household, with some testifying to Alan's frequent complaints about his marriage. Jane Bunting's testimony proved especially damning. She described Alan's attempts to probe her about someone who could help with his problem, a request she'd found alarming but hadn't taken seriously at the time. It was further revealed that the killer had stolen cash from a secret drawer in the shop's office, suggesting they had been given inside knowledge and the money was part of the payment for the murder. Alan's defense barrister, Jonathan Steele, attacked the credibility of Jane's decades-old memory, questioning her reliability and motives for coming forward so many years after the fact. Steele argued that the prosecution's evidence was circumstantial and lacked the concrete proof necessary for conviction. He framed Alan as a man struggling with grief and financial strain, whose alleged comments were being distorted and misinterpreted under the weight of lost time and intense media attention. Margaret Spooner, Alan's former lover and co-defendant, was also the focus of intense scrutiny. She denied any involvement in Carol's death, maintaining that while she and Alan had an affair, she had no knowledge of any plot against Carol. In her own testimony, Margaret claimed that Alan had been frustrated with his life, but had never explicitly discussed harming Carol. Ultimately, Margaret's defense held, and she was acquitted. After 9 weeks, the jury delivered a guilty verdict for Alan, finding him responsible for conspiring to murder Carol. Mr. Justice Field, who presided over the case, condemned Alan's actions before pronouncing the sentence. "The betrayal you inflicted upon your family and community is profound," he said. "You sought to deceive all who knew you, condemning your wife to a cruel and violent end for your own selfish gain." Alan was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 22 years, a sentence reflective of the calculated cruelty of his crime. So, to recap the extended timeline, August 13, 1981. Alibi established. Alan Morgan takes his 2 children to a cinema in Luton, creating an alibi. Murder of Carol Morgan. While Alan is away, Carol is brutally murdered in the family store's storeroom with a heavy weapon. Alan returns to find her body and notifies the police, presenting himself as a distraught husband. 1981 to 1983. Investigation begins. Detective Chief Superintendent Brian Prickett leads a massive investigation, one of the largest in Bedfordshire's history. The police find no clear suspects, and the case goes cold. 2018. Forensic reopening. Bedfordshire police reopened the case, hoping modern forensic technology would uncover new evidence. 2021. New witness statement. Jane Bunting reveals that Alan had once hinted at wanting his wife gotten rid of. This new testimony casts suspicion on Alan and challenges his long-standing alibi. June 19, 2024. Trial conclusion. After a 9-week trial at the Old Bailey, Alan Morgan, now 74, is found guilty of conspiring to murder his wife Carol. His current wife, Margaret, is acquitted. The verdict brings closure to Carol's family after more than 40 years. The truth was devastating for Carol's family, particularly her 2 children. They had spent decades believing their father's innocence, trusting in the alibi he had used to clear himself from suspicion. Carol's daughter, Jane Morgan, expressed the overwhelming heartbreak of knowing that her own father had orchestrated the murder. Her statement after the trial revealed the trauma of such betrayal. "I have lost both my parents to this crime, one taken by violence and the other by a lifetime of lies." The town of Linslade, which had lived with whispers of Carol's murder for decades, was similarly shaken. Alan's conviction brought relief but also unease as residents processed the reality that he had lived among them for years while harboring such a dark secret. For the people of Linslade, the trial's resolution offered some closure. Still, it also served as a haunting reminder of how long secrets can remain hidden. The murder of Carol Morgan and the conviction of her husband highlight the tragic consequences of domestic betrayal and financial desperation. It underscores the importance of community awareness and the courage of individuals who come forward, even years later, to help seek justice. Jane Bunting's eventual decision to speak up became a critical component of the case, showing that silence can delay justice but cannot erase it entirely. The commitment of the cold case detectives who worked tirelessly to solve Carol's murder exemplifies the role of modern forensic advancements and dedicated police work in resolving crimes that may otherwise go unpunished. The murder of Carol Morgan was finally solved after more than 40 years. The conviction of Alan Morgan closed a dark chapter in the lives of Carol's family and the Linslade community. This case stands as a powerful reminder of the resilience of those affected by violence, the dedication of investigators, and the courage of witnesses. Though justice may sometimes be delayed, this case affirms that it can still be achieved, even after decades, bringing light to the darkest secrets. Thank you for listening to Carol's case. Take care, stay safe, and look out for each other. Until next time, bye.